Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 1 to verse 22. I'm going to have to get on my secretary to figure out what did the secretary do. Typo, these secretaries nowadays. The book of Deuteronomy. The Hebrew name for the book of Deuteronomy is actually Devarim, and it means words. But an ancient name for the book of Devarim is Mishnah Torah, which means repetition of the Torah. The word Mishneh or Mishnah means to repeat. The oral law in what is called the Mishnah, which was the first major written book after the destruction of the temple. They put the oral law in written form, and it's called the Mishnah, which means the repetition. And what they would do is they would say a verse, sentence, and then the disciple would repeat it, and they would learn by repetition. But the book of Deuteronomy, again, is a repetition of the Torah. The book of Deuteronomy in the Greek Septuagint, which was translated from Hebrew to Greek about 200 years before Yeshua, means second law. Nomos is mistranslated actually, into law. It should have, if they wanted to call it, they should call it Duro Torah, but not law. Law is from the Greek nomos, and then when it went into Latin, lex. Well, the Latin lex, law, is actually about casual law or rules and regulations, and that's not what the Torah means. The Torah does not mean rules and regulations. Yes, there are rules and regulations inside of the Torah, but the word Torah actually means the instruction, the teaching, the doctrine that is the way of Yahweh, Haderech Yahweh. And so this is what Deuteronomy is. It is a retelling in a 1 month period. It is a summary, and what I would call a summary of what Adonai had been giving us through Moses in the last 40 years. The outline of the book of Devarim is the last month of the life of Moses. To understand Devarim, to understand Deuteronomy, is to understand that this is the last month in the life of Moses, and it's about 3 sections. Some scholars put a 4th section, but it's about 3 sections. The first is the first address of Moses, a historical overview, which we're going to begin today. The second address of Moses is more mitzvot, mishpatim, and chukim, which are commandments, statutes, laws. This is where laws comes from, plural. Mitzvot, mishpatim, and chukim are all in the plural. And these are various injunctions, guidelines, judgments that Adonai has given us, depending on what the King James or other English translations are. And then, there we go again. Boy, the secretary must have been up late that night. The third address is the last words and acts of Moses, and then the death and burial of Moses. Now, what's interesting about the book of Devarim is when we read Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, Moses is very much the author, very much the one who is addressing the people, many times in first person, second person. The book of Devarim has a lot of third person, which means that we have the understanding that now Joshua, who is now taking over and Moses has already, if you remember in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, has given Joshua the second in command, in a sense, to be the one that is going to take over. And so we believe that Moses gave, as he was addressing the people of Israel, like it says there in the first verse, these are the words, Ele Chadevarim, spoken beyond the Jordan to the whole of Israel, in the wilderness, in the Arava, facing Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Lavan, Charoshes, and the Zara. It is, again, 11 days march from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. And so while they were there in Kadesh Barnea, he started addressing, and then they started coming and into the land, into the Moab, as we're going to see. And then there's the death and burial of Moses by Adonai himself. It is Adonai who buries Moses, and even Joshua and the elders did not know where he was buried. But Joshua is the one that recorded everything else. Of course, Moses could not record his own death and burial, but it was Joshua who recorded the last acts of Moshe. There are 9 teachings in this parasha. As always, remember, every parasha has a number of teachings or teaching points, talking points. This has 9. And again, all the way from a summary from Kadesh Barnea all the way to Moab and the last words of Moses. What should have been an 11-day journey, no more than 2 weeks, to go from Sinai to the borders of Canaan and entrance in the Promised Land. It's only 160 to 170 miles between Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, and Kadesh Barnea, turned into a 40-year wandering period. Can you imagine 2 weeks? They would have been in the land, taking over the land, going up the central highlands, and coming into the Promised Land. But that turned from a 2-week time, 11 days from Sinai to the border of the Canaan, and then entrance into the Promised Land. It took 40 years. Why? Because of disobedience, because of rebellion. Now, one of the things that in our own lives, and I did pray, and one of the things I pray every day is for our backslidden brothers. And even think of the word backslidden. It's like, have you ever tried climbing a mountain? You're going up the mountain, and then all of a sudden you slip and fall and tumble through, and then you start again and go up the mountain. You know, like even as kids, we would do that with the slides. Remember the slides? And you try to run up the slide, and then all of a sudden you slide back, and then you go up again. In a sense, backslidden means that you're trying, but then for some reason you let go. There's nothing to hang on to. You slip and slide, and you backslide, and then you're at the place sometimes all the way down. You're on step 1. We've all done that. Can you imagine where we would be? Some of you here would be pastors. Some of us would be in other positions if it hadn't been for our backsliding, our going back and allowing ourselves not to hold on to Yeshua, not to hold on to the word of Elohim, not to hold on to what he has for us. He has given us, and like it says, no one has been tempted with anything else but that is common to man. And with every temptation, he has given us a way of escape. In other words, with every temptation to backslide, with every He has given us a hanger-on, something to hang on with. He has given us something to hang on. We could hang on to His word, to this verse. We could hang on to this prayer. We could even hang on to the body of Messiah, even hang on to one another. We need, can you imagine? You are, again, I don't know how this will sound, but you are a hanger for someone else. Someone else could hang on to you. You could hang on to one another. You could hang on to this one. You could hang on to our elders, to us. I have others that I hang on to. I've hung on to this person. I've hung on to this word. I've come to Adonai. But Israel, they backslid 40 years. Moses would have been in the promised land. All those people, the generation that left Egypt, would have been in the promised land. But because of that backsliddenness, they slid back. And 40 years they wandered. And that generation, including Miriam, Aaron, and Moses, did not go into the promised land. It was the second generation that went in. All because of backsliddenness. And not just in one person, but in a group of people. But think of this, the backsliddenness of one group caused the whole nation to spend 40 years outside of Kadesh Barnea in that wilderness of Paran, between Kadesh Barnea and Eisengeber in the sea, and they spent 40 years. Now, as we said the other day, we don't know what happened in those 40 years. Those 40 years are hidden to us. Many people think that the Exodus took 40 years. No. The Exodus from Egypt to Sinai took 3 months. 1 year we spent in Sinai, and then 11 days to Kadesh Barnea, and there in Kadesh Barnea we sent the spies, and another 38 years, and at the end, 40 years as we get there. Let's see that in chart form. Here is Egypt to the crossing of the sea. They crossed the sea, and from the crossing of the sea to Mount Sinai, of course, that took 3 months. At Mount Sinai, we were there for a year, and we received the 10 Commandments. We received Mishpatim and Hukim, and the tabernacle was set up. All that took place. And then that was the end of our staying in. We had our second Passover, and as soon as the Passover was ready, there was preparation to leave Sinai. We left Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. This was an 11-day journey, and this was in the second year. Remember, this was the second Passover, so this is the second year. Sending of the 12 spies. And because of the rebellion here, spent 39 years wandering around Kadesh Barnea and the sea there. And we got water from the rock. And at this point, of course, Moses is judged, and Miriam dies, and then Aaron dies. And then we go from Kadesh Barnea to the plains of Moab, and we are there in the 40th year. Now, all this took place in a sense, 2 books, the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers, Shmot and Bamidbar. The book of Leviticus are Levitical laws that Adonai gave to Moses around this time. It is what we would call, or I would call, a parentheses book. The book of Exodus and the book of Numbers are chronological, but the book of Leviticus is a parentheses book of Levitical laws. These are just many mishpatim and hukim that are not in Exodus or reiterated in Leviticus. And then we have the book of Numbers. And the book of Numbers, again, goes from the second Passover through all this to the plains of Moab in the 40th year. Now, the book of Deuteronomy was just the last month of the 39th year. The last month of the 39th year and the 40th year when we get there. So the book of Deuteronomy is just a book of a summary, a Mishnah, a repetition of what Adonai gave us pretty much in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. All the Mishpatim, Hukim, and it gives just a summary, a repetition. And so as we see this, we could better put our mind as to what is happening, and then we'll figure out why is all these things going on. Of course, this is the journey, as it says there in Deuteronomy 1:3. If you go to Deuteronomy 1:3, it says, it was the 40th year on the first day of the 11th month that Moses spoke to the sons of Israel as Yahweh ordered. So they go on their journey from Kadesh Barnea, which is over here, and they come up around Edom, around Moab, and they come here. This is where all the stuff with Balaam and Balak took place right there. And so it was the 40th year, the 11th month, the first day. So in 1 month, it would we will be on the first month, which by that time Joshua, the book of Joshua begins on the beginning of the 41st year, the first month, and the 14th day they have Pesach. Israel is in the plains of Moab there in Deuteronomy 1:5. So these are the plains of Moab. By the way, Sodom and Gomorrah is here in the plains of Moab, where Moses and them stayed and used as a staging area before they crossed the Jordan into Jericho, is where Sodom and Gomorrah are at right there. And many people see Sodom and Gomorrah down here, but they are actually over here. And we've spent a couple of years digging here in Sodom and Gomorrah right here. And the city is still there, still visible. Dr. Collins from Trinity Southwest has been working on that for many years. And so right now we are, this arrow right here says that we're right here. The 40th year, 11th month, first day of that. So we're right here right now. And in 1 month, Moshe will be home with Adonai. Now, when we say Moshe died, we always talk about Moshe's death. And we're going to see that Moshe really didn't die. Moshe, when it came for him to die and his bodily functions stopped, was actually raptured and taken like Enoch and like Elijah. And we're going to see this when we finish up the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim. Here's a geography of Canaan. Go with me to chapter 1, verse 6. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Go to verse 5. That's what I had this one for. Verse 5, we're right here. And it says, there in the land of Moab, beyond the Jordan, Moses set himself to expound this Torah. And he said, and so here we see that what we call the second law, or a repetition of the Torah, the Mishnah Torah, the Deuteronomos in Greek, Moses himself comes to expound. And the word there, expound, to teach, we would use the word exegete. To exegete means to expound, to bring out. To eisegete, by the way, the opposite, eisegete, is to put in. Most of our teaching has to be exegetical teaching, bringing out from the Torah, not putting into the Torah what we want. A lot of people read the scriptures and their philosophies or their understandings they bring in. No, we have to pull out. So Moses pulled out. He expounded. He preached. He taught what the Torah was, and he gave it to them. Again, this is in 3 sermons. This is repeating what he had given, what Adonai had given him from the beginning for the last 40 years. Everything he learned, everything that occurred in these last 40 years, now in the 40th year, he is repeating. Of course, when you repeat 40 years' worth, can you imagine repeating 40 years' worth of history and situations in a 1-month period? A lot is going to definitely be lost. And so he hit some of the high points. Now, the next one, the geography of Canaan, go to verse 6. Yahweh our Elohim said to us at Horeb. Now, one of the problems that some people have is that sometimes the word Mount Sinai is used. Other times, Horeb is used. So Horeb and Sinai, or Sinai, are used interchangeably. So many modern liberal scholars, biblical scholars, have said, well, they've called it the documentary hypothesis, and there was probably 4 or 5 authors, not one author, Moses, and, why is he doing this? Well, we do the same thing. We call this the Sandia Mountains. Well, these are the Sandias. Now, down south, these are the Manzano Mountains. But this whole mountain range is part of the mountain range of New Mexico. It is not part of the Rocky Mountains, by the way. The Rocky Mountains end south of Santa Fe on Lavajada Hill. Lavajada Hill is the base of the Rocky Mountain. That's the last southern tip of the Rocky Mountains. And the Sandia Mountains are not part of the Rocky Mountains, although a lot of people call them part of the Rocky Mountains. But Native Americans have different names for the Sandia Mountains and the Manzano Mountains. They have different names. So sometimes, and again, here in New Mexico, it's very interesting that we have Spanish names, we have Native American names, and then we have English names many times for the same cities. San Juan or some of these pueblos have actually changed their names to their original names. And so some people use this, and some people use the original, some people use the Spanish, some people use the English, or anglicized Spanish. And so that's what's going on here. This is the same range, same mountain range. Horeb and Sinai are the same range. Sinai is one of the peaks of Horeb. So if you get confused as far as, is it Horeb or is it Sinai? Well, it's both. You have stayed long enough at this mountain. Move from here, continue your journey, go to the highlands of the Amorites, to those who make their home in the Arava, in the highlands, in the lowlands, in the Negev, and in the coastlands. Go into the land of Canaan and to Lebanon as far as the great river Euphrates. And so when we talk about the boundaries of Israel, we have two boundaries. And the geography of Canaan is involved in what is called the Highlands of the Amorites. And this is east of the Jordan Valley. You see from up here where the headwaters of the Jordan begin, around a little north of the modern city of Dan, and you have the Jordan River. Here's the Sea of Galilee, and the Jordan River goes down to the Dead Sea, and it ends at the Dead Sea today. But from here, there is an ancient riverbed that goes all the way down to the Gulf of Aqaba. The Jordan River cuts the land of Canaan, in a sense, in half, cuts what Israel should be in half. If you remember in the book of Numbers, Adonai gave to Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh the East Jordan, the East Highlands. So this is called the Highlands of the Amorites. In fact, right there, I think it says Highlands of the Amorites, or it should. These are the Highlands of the Amorites. So the Highlands of the Amorites belong to Israel by divine right. So what is now Jordan, Jordan goes all the way up to here, and then Syria begins here, and from up here we could actually see Damascus at night in the lights of Damascus. We could see it from here. And so the East Highlands belong to Israel according to this verse. Now it says the Arava. The Arava is south of the Dead Sea. It's a wilderness south of the Dead Sea. So from here in the old riverbed, probably at, with Sodom and Gomorrah or at some point in time, and that got destroyed. And so now you do have a rift valley. By the way, the Rift Valley begins in northern Lebanon, goes through the Jordan Valley, and goes all the way past Ethiopia to Lake Victoria. In fact, maybe I think in Zimbabwe, in that area, is where the Rift Valley, the Jordan Rift Valley, ends. And so this is the Arava. And we get the word Arab, by the way, from the Arava. This desert people were called the Arava people, or Arab. And then the next one that it says is the Highlands. And this is the central Highlands. In Israel, this is the central Highlands. And Jerusalem, or Jebus at this time, was at the top of the central Highlands. Of course, it goes down, and then there's a valley, the Megiddo Valley here, and then the Galilee Mountains up here. And so the highlands in the west is to Israel. The lowlands, the Shephelah. The Shephelah is like Mesa, and it's over here. In between the highlands, you have the Shephelah, the lowlands, and then you have the Negev, and the Negev is this desert area from the Arava to the Mediterranean is the Negev. And of course, you have the coastlands. So this right here gives us a geography of Canaan. And one of the things that I taught biblical geography in college, and I really encourage every one of you to get you a Bible atlas. Everyone should have a Bible atlas. And as most Bibles have a little small atlas in the back, but everyone should have a Bible atlas so that when you're reading something, you're actually marking it in your Bible atlas, or even just reading a Bible atlas cover to cover. And as you read your scriptures, you'll know where, when, why, how things are going on. And so please, geography is very important. in studying Scripture. Of course, the borders, it says, are to Lebanon. Here's Israel. Look at Israel in a modern map. Just this little area is Israel. Just this little area. But the borders is from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates, all the way up to Lebanon and what is called Syria. This is Adonai's borders for Israel. Not just this on both sides of the Jordan as he gave Moses to Canaan, Canaan to Moses, but from Adonai's point of view, it goes to the Euphrates. Now, the next thing that happens is Adonai gives, through Moses, the beginning of Deuteronomy history lessons. And the first history reminder, the first summary is the Judges. So from verse 9 through 18, it was then that I told you. And so remember in Yitro, our Yitro Parsha, we see there that, again in Exodus 18, that through his father-in-law Yitro, Jethro, that Adonai gives to Moses the idea that you shall have judges. Now, it's interesting that this section on the judges is put at the beginning of Deuteronomy, because there were times when the judges were very important, and then there was times when what happened to the judges, that a lot of the judges die in some of the judgments, and there was no judges, so Adonai had to bring in more judges. But one of the most important things in Deuteronomy that we know is that judgment, judging, discerning between two brothers, two sisters, discerning between this problem and that problem. Remember, Moses, from morning to night, would sit there and people would bring their cases to him till he was very worn out. And Yitro told him, you can't be doing this. So they selected others, judges, helpers, people that would help in lower courts. And of course, the higher judgments, or what the lower judges couldn't do, they'd bring to Moses. Kind of like a Supreme Court, where you have the small courts, the appellate courts, and then the Supreme Court. Moses alone was the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court judge, and everybody else. And so he brings this. And the question is, what is the lesson of Adonai telling us at the beginning of Judges? I remember when Adonai told Yitro to tell Moses this, this was before the Torah was given. This is before the covenant of the Ten Commandments was given. This is before Mishpatim Hukim. This is on the way to Sinai. On the way to Sinai, between Egypt for those 3 months and Sinai, Moses was judging the affairs of Israel. What basis, where did he get, because they didn't have anything of Mishpatim and Hukim. In fact, they still had the Shabbat. The Shabbat was given right before the Ten Commandments and the fourth commandment. They had Shabbat. So there was a lot of stuff that they already knew. We know that Abraham was a Torah keeper. Abraham had Mishpatim and Hukim. Where did Abraham get those? Where did Noah know about clean and unclean? Where did Cain and Abel know about sacrifices? One of the things that I want to really bring out is this idea that, you know what? Yes, we have the Ten Commandments. Yes, we have the Mishpatim Hukim, these ordinances, these statutes, these judgments, laws. But apart from Adonai giving them to us in written form, all the way from Adam, Cain and Abel, all the way from Noah's time. In fact, when Adonai judged the world, what basis did Adonai have to judge the world? It says the world was full with violence. There was, and the word there in Hebrew is Hamas. The world was filled with Hamas, with violence, killing each other, just doing awful things with one another. And Adonai judged that world. He almost did away with it, but he saved Noah. And there was a second generation. Adonai always judges, and then he brings a second generation, another generation, to redo what the other generation had not done. This is the basis of Deuteronomy. This is the basis of the Mishnah Torah that we call Deuteronomy, the repetition of Torah for the second generation. And one of the most important things that the second generation needs to know that was given to the first generations is you shall have judges, and you shall judge. In fact, every congregation that Paul established, and to the Corinthians he specifically tells them, is that they should have judges. In fact, to the Corinthians he says, isn't there one man there that you could have as a, isn't there just one man? Just one man, he says. And some of the men you have to judge, they're not even respected within the body of Messiah. And so in Corinth, the Kehillah of Corinth did have a judge, did have judges in their Beit Din. But again, they weren't respected, so people were going to the law courts of the unjust. This is 1 Corinthians 5, by the way, if you want to look at it. And so the first thing that Adonai reminds, the history lesson of when we came out of Egypt, the first thing that Adonai does is he appoints judges. And judges are important because the second generation, and as he reiterates the Torah, as he reiterates the Ten Commandments in these scriptures, as he reiterates the Mishpatim, Hukim, the statutes, judgments, they need to know that they are under authority. Every one of us is under authority. And then he goes on in verse 19. So we left Horeb, we left Horeb, we left Sinai, and came to this vast and terrible wilderness you have seen. We made it for the highlands of the Amorites, as Yahweh had, our Elohim had ordered, and arrived at Kadesh Barnea. And at Kadesh Barnea, Adonai says what? March in, take possession, possess the land. Remember, when they got there, 11 days from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. And when they got there, Adonai says, possess the land. Possess, go in there and take it. You guys are a mighty warriors. You guys are my people. Go in and take it. And of course, in fact, here in Deuteronomy, it gives us something very interesting. In verse 22, it says, you said, then you all came to me and said, let us send men ahead of us to explore the country. They will report to us which way we must go and what towns we shall go to. This seemed good advice to me. So right now in Deuteronomy, when Moses is remembering 40 years ago, something is said here that wasn't in Numbers 13 when they're sent to reconnoiter the land. There, Moses sends them to reconnoiter the land. Over here, it says, you told me, you advised, and I took your advice. This was the advice of the people saying, Moses, you're telling us to go possess the land, but how do we know what kind of land it is? So they gave Moses to do this, and that's when Moses sends the 12 spies. He sends the 12 spies, and of course we know what happened. They came back, 10 came back with a negative report. 2, Joshua and Caleb, came back with a positive report. This is in the second year. Remember, this is in the second year. And because they rebelled against Moshe and said, in fact, if you remember, they were even going to mutiny. They were even going to kill Moses and Aaron. They were going to do that and then go back to Egypt. And of course, Adonai brought a judgment, and they were judged. And now for the next 38 years, 40 in total, one for every year, they would now be going around in circles around Kadesh, between Kadesh and Eisengeber, all that area, they would be going around in circles, back to Kadesh, back to, and all this area. Why? Again, because of backsliding, because of rebellion, because of not having something to hold on, the word of Elohim. The word of Elohim is alive and active, sharper than a two-edged sword. We could always hold on to the word. When you can't hold on to nothing, just hold on to the word. And so we're at Kadesh. And then what happens is Adonai gives more judgments. Again, rebukes them for the 10 spies. In verse 40 of chapter 2, verse 40, as for you, turn around, go back into the wilderness in the direction of the Sea of Suf. So between Kadesh Barnea and the sea, there in Eisengeber, they were to go back over and over again. Adonai promises them that he would bless them. In verse 46, for many days you had to stay at Kadesh, your full tally of days, and which is 38 years. Chapter 2, verse 1, we turned around, therefore, and made for the wilderness in the direction of the Sea of Suf. And for many days we wondered about the highlands of Seir. And Adonai says, you have wandered long enough in these highlands, go north, and I will give the people this order. And so for now in 2, 1 to 13, it's Kadesh to Moab. So again, in the book of Numbers, we've already been to Kadesh. We've already been to Moab. We've been, all those things that occurred at the end chapters of Numbers, Moses is just going here, reiterating, giving a summary of what happened there. So they got to Kadesh, then Kadesh to Moab, and again, keeps telling them what they did and how they were afraid of the people there. Verse 8 to 8, to 7, Yahweh your Elohim has blessed you in all you do. He has watched over you, over your journeying through the vast wilderness. Yahweh your Elohim has been with you these 40 years, and you have never been in want. Can you imagine Adonai for 40 years blessed, never in want? Water, even manna. Adonai gave us what we needed. Another place he says, he gave us in the night a pillar of fire to keep us warm. In the day, a shadow, a cloud to keep us cool. Adonai is an Elohim that blesses. Verse 8, so we passed beyond those of the kinsmen of ours, the sons of Esau, who live in Seir by the Arava, Elath, Eisen Geber road. And changing direction, we took the road towards the wilderness of Moab. And there, as they were going up, people were saying, oh, the Anakim, the Raphaim, the giants, the Nephilim, all these people are there. And again, they crossed and they went forward. In verse 14, we crossed the Wadi Zered, which is on the Dead Sea. And there are valleys going out of the Dead Sea. And the Zered is one of the wadis. And they crossed back into the land of Moab. And the Arnon, they crossed the Arnon in, again, 26 to 31. He reiterates what happened in Numbers with Sihon, with Og, and the country of the Ammonites, how they destroy Og and these people. And so he just reiterates to the point of verse 18, chapter 3, verse 18. Then I gave you this command. These are the last instructions of Moses, beginning the last instructions. Then I gave you this mitzvot. Yahweh our Elohim has given you this land for your own. All your fighting men must take up arms and march to the head of your brothers, the sons of Israel. Only your wives and children, your flocks, you have many, shall stay behind in towns I have given you, until such a time as Yahweh settles you. And he tells them to go and to fear not. He's preparing the people to now cross the land. What's interesting of this section between verse 18 and verse 23, between 18 and 23, he tells them, do not be afraid. Yahweh, your Elohim, is fighting for you. And this is a middle of a sentence. And in the middle of a sentence, for some reason, I don't know why, but in the middle of this sentence, the Masoretes or Maimonides, who later on gave us the parashot, every parsha, divided into parshas. This parsha ends here in the middle of the verse. And it says there, Yahweh, your Elohim, is fighting for you. And I pleaded then with Yahweh, period. And I pleaded then with Yahweh, period, is the last part of verse 22. Next week's parsha is Va'et Hanan, and I pleaded. But it's interesting that in the middle of a verse, the parsha ends in the middle of a verse. Next week he's going to continue with this history lesson, and as they arrive there in Transjordan. Now, tonight, beginning sundown tonight, is the beginning of Tisha B'Av. Begins tonight at sunset and Sunday, July 18th at nightfall. Tisha B'Av. What is Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av is a day that marks the Babylonian destruction of the temple that Solomon built, and the day that the Romans burnt and destroyed the restored Second Temple 500 years later in 70 AD, 586 BC or BCE for the Babylonian, and 70 of the CE of the Common Era for the restored Herodian temple. Other things throughout history have been marked, but these are historical. And Beitar was destroyed by the Romans again in Tisha B'Av, in the 9th day of the 5th month. Av is the 5th month, so we're in the 5th month. I don't know if any of you saw the moon, the new moon, a few days ago. So today is the 9th day, beginning tonight. We're in the 8th day of the month, the 5th month of Av right now. And so tonight will be the 9th day of the 5th month, which means that we're going to have the 6th month and then the 7th month, the month of Elul and the month of Tishri, and then Pesach, the fall feast. So we're going to start getting ready for a fall feast. Now when we get in August, by the way, this year, I believe the Sukkot is going to be around September 27th, 29th, around there. Right before then, yeah. So we're going to be getting ready for that. Now, is Tisha B'Av a Jewish only? No, it's biblical. Zechariah 8:9 says, "Thus says Yahweh of hosts," or Yahweh Shavaot in Hebrew, "the fast of the 4th month, and the fast of the 5th, which is Tisha B'Av, and the fast of the 7th, which is Yom Kippur, and the fast of the 10th shall be to the house of Judah seasons of joy and gladness and cheerful feasts. Therefore, love, truth, and peace." Now, again, we're talking about in the millennial kingdom. In the millennial kingdom, when Messiah comes back, remember, all the feasts, even the feasts of Yom Kippur, which is a fast day and a day. Now, when we say fast, by the way, the Hebrew is not the word to not eat food. The Hebrew is to afflict our soul. The word for fast that has come to be known as not eating or abstaining from, those of you that were Catholics, remember for Lent you had to abstain from candy bars or cookies or drinking or all these things for 40 days, and you fasted on Fridays, not eating anything, or you fasted from anything but fish. And fasting is afflicting your soul. The Hebrew is afflicting. You shall afflict your soul. Now, to most of us, not eating for a day is, is afflicting our soul, afflicting our body. But the Hebrew, the affliction of the soul of the 4th month, of the 5th, 7th, and 10th, are times of sorrow. And yes, the fast of the 5th, which is Tisha B'Av, we are in a state of sorrow for the destructions of our temples, of the place where Adonai lives. But remember, Adonai in the millennium, in fact, there's a 3rd temple that is going to be built soon. And there's going to be a 4th temple. The 3rd temple that is going to be built prior to the coming of Messiah is going to be a temple of which the anti-Messiah is going to proclaim that he is Elohim, where he sets up the abomination of desolation of 2 Thessalonians 2, of Revelation chapter 13. That's the 3rd temple. But Yeshua is going to build a 4th temple, the millennial temple, Ezekiel's temple. And that 4th temple, and in the millennium, then the fast that now we're afflicting our soul in remembrance to the temple, we're going to rejoice because now Messiah, as our priest and king is going to now be in that temple, and everything of fasting is going to be gone, and joy, seasons of joy. Tisha B'Av is not going to be a sorrowful day. Tisha B'Av is going to be a good day. And so I would encourage, again, those of you, this is not a Jewish, a lot of people say, well, that's the Jews, that's a Jewish fest. No, it's not Jewish. Yes, it is from the house of Judah, says there. Shall be for the house of Judah. But if you're grafted into the olive tree of Israel, then we partake of the whole Tanakh. So this thing is still not obsolete. It hasn't been taken away. And so tomorrow, starting tomorrow night, and those of you, of course, that are diabetics or elderly or children are exempt. But to the most part, of course, if you work, if you have a job or something like that, tomorrow you might have to modify that, but afflict your soul in other areas. Because remember, it's not just not eating, it's afflicting our soul. It's coming to a point of hurting. Just like when you remember the anniversary of when your loved one died, or you remember, no matter how many years pass, even if it happened in our childhood, we still remember the anniversaries of when someone died, a loved one died, and you still feel that sorrow in your heart. You still feel that, I wish I could see them again. I wish I could, hug them again. I wish I could just say one more, I love you. And there's a sorrow that comes with losing a loved one. The temple, the place where Adonai dwelt, the place where he is there. And that's why when people go to the Western Wall, they're not worshiping the Western Wall. They're not. The Western Wall is just a wall like any other wall. There's nothing holy about the Western Wall. It's what's on the other side. It's what was on the other side. That's the closest we could get to where the Holy of Holies was. And now where the Holy of Holies was is trampled by false religion. And so we remember our temple. May Adonai rebuild the Messianic temple. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. When the kingdom comes that we pray every day for, then the temple, Ezekiel's temple, with Messiah, Yeshua. Yeshua is going to be the high priest and the king of Jerusalem and the high priest of the temple. So remember that tomorrow. By the way, not only do we have a secular birthday, but if you get your birthday, the day that you were born, and you put it into the Hebraic calendar, it'll tell you when you were born on the Hebrew calendar. Now, what's interesting about the Hebrew calendar is that, for example, tonight, when the sun goes down, check the position of the moon, the crescent. It's a waxing crescent. And as I'm going to look at it at 11 o'clock, at 1 o'clock, and as I look at it, I'm going to remember that at 11 o'clock tonight, the position of the moon, where the moon is, it'll probably be about right here, about 11 o'clock. And that position of the moon is when I was born. I was born at 9 o'clock on the 9th of Av. Of course, July 23rd in the Gregorian calendar. But remember, on the Gregorian calendar, the position of the moon to when you were born is totally off. But on the biblical calendar, you could always figure out that if you have your birth certificate and it tells you the time, you could actually go to that time and say, when I was being born, the moon was at that position. and it was this day in the Hebrew calendar, the way Adonai marks time. So I was born on the 9th of Av. Interesting that I was born on a month that would be a day of sorrow, and I'm a happy guy. Well, we want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom rest of the day. And let's go ahead and stand. And I thank you, Father, for your word, and that we could do some talking points that your people could go home and study up on and think over. And as I give them these things, Father, that they could go home and study the scriptures to see if these things be so. Father, today we talked about backsliding. And Father, Israel has backslid so many times, but we have too. And we can't point fingers unless we point fingers at ourselves first. We can't judge others unless we judge ourselves first. And so, Father, I pray that as we look over summary form the book of Deuteronomy, and Moses is especially saying, just like Father Yeshua on the Olivet Discourse, Yeshua, Father, on the night that he was betrayed with the disciples in the upper room, told them and warned them this was his last day. In fact, Father, the Olivet Discourse and the upper room discourse are Yeshua's last will and testament. Paul also, Father. Paul to the Ephesian elders does the same thing, repeats and warns them of even people coming in with wolves in sheep's clothing. Warns them. In fact, Father Yeshua, in the book of Revelation, the 7 letters from Yeshua, the 7 epistles from Yeshua to 7 congregations, Father warns them. Father, constantly Moses and prophets, Yeshua, Paul, comes and gives us warnings. Things that we've already learned. We've learned these things. We know them. But we need to be reminded of them, Father. And so, as Moses reminds Israel in the last month of his life and gives Deuteronomy the last will and testament, repeats the Torah that he had given for the last 40 years. So today, Father, when we read Deuteronomy, may this be a repetition and a summary form of Torah to us and to new believers, Father, that every new believer could read Deuteronomy as his first book, a summary of what the Torah is all about. Yevarechecha Yahweh va'ish merecha. Aid Yahweh panav elecha vichunecha. Asa Yahweh panav elecha vayasem lecha shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you, be gracious unto you. May Yahweh lift up the ladder of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a good day. Thank you. Shalom, shalom. Welcome to Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries. Thank you for joining us on our channel.